So, sometimes in life, people give us really good advice, and sometimes people give us really terrible advice. This is one of the few moments where Jesus gives some really clear advice on what a life well lived is. And it's not like fun to hear, but it's like not fun when you first hear it, but as you spend time reflecting, you know it's right and you know it's good. So as we jump in, we've just spent 3 weeks talking about Jesus giving us a picture on how to pray, how to give, right? And how to fast, how to create these spaces where God's space and our place get close to one another. And now Jesus is turning in the Sermon on the Mount and focusing on our relationship with the world around us. So if you join me, not on the screen because the bulb blew up and that was really loud, and we'll have a different projector by God's grace next week. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 24. They're in your seat pockets, in front of you, on your phone. And let's jump in. Hear the word of the Lord. Jesus said this: "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either they will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So as we jump in and we talk about money and our relationship with finances in this life, I want to step back a little bit right before this, in the very beginning of the book. In the very beginning of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible, God creates the heavens and the earth and the animals and the people, and he looks at it, and what does he call it? He calls it good. Right? It's right. It's beautiful, right? So as we start to think about finances, as we start to think about our resources, God created this world and called it good. Is money bad in itself? No. Is money good in itself? No, money just is. Does that make sense? Can you do bad things with money? Yes. If you don't know that, watch the news. It takes like 2 seconds, right? Right? Can you do really wonderful things with money as well? Right? And so as we jump into this, in general as humans, we tend to do one of two things. We either think money's bad, right? Or we love it and think it's like it will solve all of our problems. We tend to one of two extremes, but God created it. And God called these resources that he made good. And as a first premise idea, as followers of Jesus, we understand that Satan, the evil one, can evil create in this world? No. What does evil do in this world? It destroys and it counterfeits good things, right? It turns a good gift like money or our sexuality or the words that we speak, right? It counterfeits them in a way, right, that turns something wonderful into something terrible, right? So we might use money in poor ways. It does not mean money itself is evil. And secondly, I'm going to say Jesus isn't discouraging you from trying to climb the ladder at your workplace. Is it wrong to seek career advancement? Is it wrong to seek career advancement if you forsake your family and every human being around you in your life? Yes, right? So Jesus isn't saying success is bad in this. I just want to be clear right off the bat. But he's going to give us a warning. And when God gives a warning, there's probably a reason for it. God gives warnings because we need them. Like when I say, when I tell my children that stove's hot, what do I mean? That stove's hot. Please don't touch it. And Jesus is giving us hope and a way forward that will allow us to engage in our finances and engage in our success in this world in a way that won't destroy us, that won't destroy our families, and won't destroy the people living around us. So we're going to pick this up, and we're going to start with the first of three images. So those might have sounded like three different ideas. They're one, right? In Scripture, in the ancient world, they tended to have like an ABA formula when teaching something. So they bring the idea up once, they bring it up a second time as an illustration, and then restate the truth again. This is one of those moments in Scripture. So we're going to talk through the first illustration that Jesus uses as he's trying to get across what a life well lived looks like. So let's jump into it. We'll be in verse 19 to 21 first. Jesus says this, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So Jesus uses three images. The first image we get is of the what destroying things? The moth, right? The first thing we got, it's this picture of nature. It's entropy. It's things in nature move from a state of order to a state of disorder. It's like my children's bedroom, right? And it doesn't take very long, right? In nature, things quickly, or your garage, like your garage, after you get it perfectly organized and everything's in its spot and you can find things, and then and then you do your first project and it's too late and you're too lazy to put everything back where it was and you start the pile all over again. Or maybe just me, the rest of you have clean garages. Anyway, right? So this first image of a moth, to a first century hearer of that, you're going to think of the nature's way of corroding and eating away and destroying what we have collected. Does that make sense? Moths were incredibly destructive. We're going to talk more about them in a minute. The second image we have we see it on all the cars here, is rust. So this is weird. In California, I don't think I realized that cars rusted, other than the cars that were like on the beach. Your cars don't rust there. There would have to be water, right, I guess, for that to happen. But rust is time's corrosion on our things. Like, sometimes does time just do damage even if we're really good to something? Sometimes time just wipes values. How many people still listen to music on the same device you did 30 years ago? How many people make phone calls on the same thing they did in the early 90s? Raise your hand if you even have a landline. Raise your hand if you have a landline. There you go. Yeah, that's impressive. All right, game on. I've never lived someplace with a landline in my entire adult life. I did as a kid. What? Well, I lived in California with a 50 billion other people. Right? So the second one, this image of rust, is the corrosion that time does, right? Time just eventually destroys things, right? And third, we have the image of a thief, right? And this is humanity's destruction of the world around them. Do sometimes humans not do a great job taking care of the things around them? Yeah. Like, we tend to be pretty destructive by nature. We don't even need nurture to do it, right? So I want to talk through each of these three images, because for the first hearers of each of these three, they would create word pictures in their mind. So in the ancient world, textiles, or fabric, were incredibly expensive. Almost nobody in Israel at the time of Jesus would have more than one or two sets of clothing. That's it. You have an outer tunic, and you have an inner tunic and an outer cover, and maybe you have an extra one if you're doing really well. A lot of people's wealth was wrapped up in the garments that they owned. How many people have ever put away a garment to find later, when you pull it out after years, that mice have gotten into it, or moths? Raise your hand if you ever put something away in the garage and a mice decided to make its home inside of your box. What do you do with the stuff inside? Can you fix it? No, it's ruined, right? And for someone, if you only own 2 pairs of clothing, if you were doing really well, how terrifying would it be, right, if your clothes were destroyed? It's not like you and I mean, I think most of us probably have more clothes than fit in our drawers, right? Like my struggle is trying to get everything to fit, right? But for them, moth destroy. Often people's entire family inheritance would be in cloth that was saved and protected inside of their houses, right? In the ancient world, people would see the intensity of that destruction. And Jesus is warning us that, you know what, people? The things that you hold on to that have worth and value in this life eventually are not going to be valuable. Right? It's like your electronics from the 80s, like the answering machine from the 80s that you still have put away in a box. Is that going to have value and worth again? Right? Or that box of things you put away that the mice made a home in, right? That the reality of life is everything is fleeting. Jesus is acknowledging these things that you work so hard for have a shelf life because nature will eventually destroy it. It's like people who bought a house and did a bunch of work to it and then 20 years later happened. Like my parents bought a house like 30 years ago and they just did a ton of work to it. And now my dad looks at like the ranch they have and he's like, I need all new fences. He's like, I can't do that anymore, right? That there are things that nature just destroys. And the second image he gives is this image of rest. It's the Greek word briosis. And it means this image of time. You know, some words paint a picture. Right, I say rainbow. Do you think of the word rainbow? No, what do you think of? You think of like the colors, right? You think of a moment where you saw it. It's the same for this word. It's this image of something being eaten away by time. Right? It's like you build a grain house. Right? You see these as you drive by farms. What eventually happens at those farms to the grain elevators? Right? You see this house and the grain elevator slowly tipping. Right, and collapsing. It's this image that these things that we find so much value and worth in, eventually they get swallowed up by time. They were so labor intensive and expensive to make, but there's no permanence in them. And then Jesus, this third one, talks about that the things that we buy and we put our resources to, do sometimes humans break them or steal them, right? In the ancient world, in Israel at that time, most houses were made of baked clay. I don't know about you. Is it very hard to get through baked clay on someone's wall, right? People, thieves, would literally break through your wall. And did you know at that time there was no banking system? You didn't like go down to the bank and like leave your money in a secured vault. You know, what did you do with your money? You literally dug a hole in your dusty floor, put a box under, and hoped that no one would come and dig it up. And one of the things that robbers did routinely in the ancient world was to break into people's houses through the side wall and start digging up their house till they found their valuables, and they would take it and move on. Jesus is warning us, if we put all of our resources towards things in this life, it's fleeting. Yeah, our houses are a little more secure. It's harder to knock through the walls at our houses. It's harder for them to get through on that. Yeah. And so Jesus is trying to remind us of this, and William Barclay says it great, so I'm just going to read it. Anyone whose happiness depends on things like this is doomed to disappointment. Any person whose treasure is in things is bound to lose their treasure. For these things there is no permanence, and no thing lasts forever. Think about when you were a teenager. And if you're currently a teenager, this will happen to you. Think about your favorite outfit in high school. Think about it. Yeah? Everyone got it in their mind? Right? For different generations. Would you wear that? Raise your hand if you'd still wear that today if you could fit into it. Whoa. That was not what I was expecting. I'd be like, no way. You would, okay, game on, never mind. Well, I'm going to pretend everyone said no instead, right? Because sometimes there are things that we treasure and are treasured possessions for us, and life happens, and time changes, and is there any more value to them? Right? But in high school, if someone would have dumped ink on you or you'd have ripped it, would you have been devastated? Yeah. Right. Jesus is warning us, if we get so wrapped up in the things that we have, we'll miss out on something greater. All right, let's keep moving because I've got a bunch of pages left. Verse 22 and 23, let's talk through this. Jesus goes on to say, and these two are connected, I'm going to thread this. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be filled with darkness. And if the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Jesus is saying that what we set our eyes and our focus on will often determine the outcome of our lives. If we live for the things that he is warning us will lead to destruction for ourselves and our families and our community, we will find exactly what we're looking for. But if we choose to believe Jesus and follow him, there's something wondrous available to us that will transform ourselves, our families, and the communities that God has placed in us. I'm going to talk just for a minute as a parent with small kids. Think about when you had small kids and you went over to someone's house who had glass things on every surface. Can you just raise your hand if you've ever done that? Right? Like, how fun is that? Right? It's like the worst experience for everyone. I love when people are like, hey, come over to my house. It's really kid-friendly. And I walk in, I'm like, oh no. Like, I'm going to freak out or they're breaking something. There is nothing else that's going to happen, right? Right? And sometimes we love our stuff so much, we're terrified that someone will mess it up, right? Right? And we're like, oh, someone might mess it up. No, I can't have someone in my house. I can't have kids in the church because they might spill food or drop goldfish and grind them into the carpet. Not that that's a good thing, but do small humans do things like that? Yeah. Right? Jesus is warning us that what we look for in life, we'll find. And if we live our life looking for the fulfillment of our things, we will be deeply disappointed. Right? Psychologists have done incredible amounts of research on what happens when you purchase something. Do you know where in the purchasing process you find you get the most dopamine in your brain? Where do you think? Before, during, or after? Where do you get the biggest dopamine hit when you buy something? Before. When you're waiting in line before you purchase it is the happiest you will ever be with a purchase that you make in your life. And it goes down, the graph on happiness and fulfillment of the things we buy drops like a rock. Right? That cell phone you were very excited about 3 years ago, are you still really excited about it? No. Right? That pair of shoes that you were just so excited about when you were 16, right? Your Converse All-Stars or whatever your clogs, we went to Holland and I watched people walking around with wood shoes, right? If that was what you were wearing, right? Like 20 years later, do they have any worth or value to you? Right? So Jesus is warning us, if we live our life for these things of the present that promise to bring fulfillment, will they bring us fulfillment in the long run? But do we believe they will so easily? Yeah. Like if we just had a better boat, right? Then we could catch all the fish, right? The fish would just jump in the boat, like Bert and Ernie yelling, and the fish jump in, right? Like, anyone watch that? Here, fishy, fishy, fishy? No, the three of us. Anyway, there was a Sesame Street skit. It doesn't matter, right? Or if you get the right house, right, your family dynamic will be wonderful because everyone will have their own room or all the kids share a room and they're just going to love it forever, right? Because siblings never grate on each other's nerves, right? right? There are all these things that promise to give us ultimate fulfillment, and they never deliver on their promises. Jesus says, is what you chase after is what you're going to find. So if you chase after fulfillment in these areas, you're going to find exactly what you're looking for. A broken-hearted existence. And he finishes with this in verse 24. Jesus says this, and it's kind of intense, so let's do this. Jesus says, no one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. If you have a master, what does that make you? Only one type of people have masters. Slaves have masters. We're going to go back in time 2,000 years. Slaves at that time had absolutely zero rights in the eyes of the law. They were not a person, they were a thing. They were a tool. Their master could do with them absolutely anything they liked. In the ancient world, a slave didn't have a day off. They were on all the time at the beck and call of their master. And every moment of their life belongs to the one who they had given their allegiance to. Our lives are far different from that. But for a slave, and the thoughts and their actions were dictated by someone other than themselves. It's hard to fathom that. This might be hard to imagine, but we as a society have more free time than almost any group of people who have ever lived. And we're anxious and depressed, and we think we're stressed from doing too much, with more leisure time than any group of people that human history has ever seen. And Jesus is setting up a dichotomy that you will pledge yourself as a slave to something, and he's asking us, where will we pledge ourselves? Will we pledge ourselves to something that brings life or death? Will we pledge ourselves to something that brings hope or hopelessness? And as a followers of Jesus, when we pledge ourselves to him, there is no time off from being a Christian. You don't get to be a Christian like on Sunday morning and Tuesday nights. There's no time off duty. It's not a schizophrenic relationship with God. Being a Christian is a whole life job when you give yourself to our Lord and our Master. Does Jesus say it's wrong to possess earthly treasure? No. But he does say it's wrong to lay it up only for yourself and to hold on to it only for yourself. In the scripture, it talks about this image of stewardship, that we are not the owner of it, but we are the people entrusted with those resources, that what is ours is no longer ours. So I just want to take a quick moment, and I'm going to run through some of the options in the world that we live in as other masters that invite us to follow them other than Jesus. So I'm going to run through a couple just real quick. So in Eastern religions, and Buddhism in particular, they have a solution to the problem of wanting more and desiring more. And the plan of the Buddha was to just strip yourself of all desires, and if you were really committed, you know what you end up doing? You end up starving to death eventually. That the Buddha says the greatest life is to starve to death because you strip yourself of every earthly desire, right, including the desire to eat. Right? But Jesus does something really different. He says, take this desire that you have, right, to make money, right, and consider using it in a way that brings blessing to God. And some voices in our world say like, hey, just money's bad, right? It's the enemy of us. There are other masters. How many of you, like no shame, maybe just a little bit, how many of you like the self-help section of the library? Or anyone here read self-help books? It's okay. I've read some. There's some helpful things in there. Sometimes we meet people, and there are people in this world that if you follow these 5 simple steps, what will your life be? It will be perfect. Right? You'll make all the right decisions, and the only reason it doesn't work is because you're not working hard enough or not doing it right. So some masters in this world are people who say, if you just listen to me and follow what I have to say, then your life will be whole. All right, we're going to pick on some other ones. Your career. Sometimes does our career promise to meet all of our needs? For those of you who are retired, did it meet all of your needs for the rest of your life? How close are you with the coworkers of the job you worked 10 years ago? Right. It's those extra evenings away from your family. Are all those things worth it at this point? Not for a moment. Right? But our careers can often vie to be our master and say like, I'll give you all the treasure you want. Your life will be so fulfilled. Like you can buy anything for your family that they want. But the one thing you can't buy with your family is more time. Right? And the master promises all and eventually takes all. John D. Rockefeller has this great saying. When someone said, Mr. Rockefeller, how much money's enough money? What did he say? Just a little bit? Just a little bit more. Right? At that point, 1% of all the finances in the entire United States were in his bank account. He owed 1% of everything in the country. Right? And he said he would be fulfilled if he just had a little bit more. So we've done this fascinating survey on how we view our wealth. Did you know that regardless of how much money you make, across the board, whether you're making 40, 20, or like $50 million a year, across the board as humans, we believe that if we make twice as much what we're making now, we'll be happy. Across the board, regardless of how much you make. If you make double that, right, you'll be happy. But Jesus is inviting us to think and live in a wholly different way. He's inviting us to live life to bring blessing to God and know that using our treasure and our resources that way is the greatest life we could ever fathom. So early on in the church, there's this great story. So Decian was one of the Caesars in Rome, and in a particularly brutal time in the church, a group of Roman soldiers went out to loot the treasures which they believed that the church possessed, because they knew they took a collection each week. So the Roman prefect barged into the church and talked to this man named Laurinaitis, who was a deacon, and he said, "Show me your treasures at once." And Laurinaitis pointed out the windows at the orphans who were being fed, and the sick who were being nursed, and the poor who were being supplied, and he said, "These are the treasures of the church." The church has always believed that what we keep, we lose, and what we spend, we have. That there's something upside down about the finances in Jesus' kingdom. And I just want to let you know, I want to quickly share the percentages so that you know how this church chooses to steward their resources. So 39% of all the tithes and offerings that the church goes to hospitality, to creating resources and spaces where people can hear the gospel, whether that's investing in the facility, whether it's hosting outside groups. It's 39% of our budget. goes to creating a space where people can come and hear the gospel, where people can get food, where people can sit and be with the people of God. We spend 37% of our budget on staffing, on people who can sit and be with folks and talk with folks and pray with people and run the administration of the church. 13% of our budget we spend on discipleship. That's running youth ministry and kids ministry and adult discipleship, that we set aside that amount and we say, we're going to use this to further the kingdom. And as a church, we give 11%, almost like around, just a hair over $20,000 a year to missionaries and local parachurch organizations that share the gospel with the community that we live in. Jesus finishes this passage with these intense words that no one can serve two masters. For either we will hate one and love the other, or we'll be devoted to one and despise the other. We can't serve God and money. I want to just take 3 minutes and give us some practical tools. Because the reality is each and every one of us has a master who's currently mastering our lives other than Jesus, or we have an area where we're tempted. Does that make sense? Like we're all tempted in different areas. So I want to give you just a couple tools. And so go ahead and listen to this and see if maybe this week you want to try one of these, and maybe you could discover a place in your life where your mind and heart might be divided in this area between Jesus and something else. So what you sacrifice for and what I sacrifice for is often the master that I serve. So first off, I want you to think about this week about tracking your time. All right, so think about and I'm not talking work time, I'm talking not 9 to 5 or whatever crazy shifts you're working this week if you're working someplace with bizarre working schedules. I'm not talking about structured time, I'm talking about the space between. I want you to take a moment and think about, what is your non-work time filled with? Because I'm going to say, when we look at what our time is filled with, where we're sacrificing our time to, sometimes we see that rise up. Maybe in the evenings you spend 3 or 4 hours watching TV, right? Or trolling on Facebook, right? Maybe your time's filled with entertainment. Maybe on Sunday morning when you find out the amount of screen time you've had, you're disgusted and swipe that as quick as possible when it says like 4 or 5 hours a day. Maybe all your free time is filled with a hobby that you really, really like. Maybe you like it so much you don't talk to your spouse for days on end because you're wrapped up in your projects. Maybe, so I come from California, which has a slightly different culture with kids. Maybe you're not a parent, you're a chauffeur. And you spend all of your weeks driving your children from event to event to event, where you spend no dinners together, you spend no quality time, you're stressed, right? And your life is more like the life of a taxi driver than a parent. There might be some master issues in that moment. And consider, do you spend any of your time, some of us, serving anyone other than your own desires and wants? Second, look at your talents. All of us are gifted in different ways. Like when my kids were 3, they banned me from coloring with them because I'm so bad at it, right? Like my 4-year-old trash talks when I try to color with her, like, stay in the lines. I'm like, I'm trying. I'm just like really bad at this. Right? It's always good to get trash talked from your 4-year-old daughter, even though she loves you. And just so all of us have gifts and abilities. Sometimes we use those only to benefit ourselves, right? And sometimes ourself and our own desires become the master instead of Jesus. Now, this is going to be the one that's less fun. If you have online banking, this is really, really easy to do. Look at your last year and see where you spent your resources, because Jesus says, where our treasure is, there our Heart is also, and he's talking about finances. It's not like where your spiritual treasure is. That's not what he's talking about. He's like, where you spend your resources reveals the state of your heart. If you only spend your resources on yourselves, what do you think your master might be instead of Jesus? Yourself, right? Like, look at what percentage you spend on housing, what percentage you spend on entertainment, what percentage you spend on your hobbies, what percentage of your income did you spend on eating out? What percentage of your income did you spend giving to something that's meaningful and life-giving for you? Jesus says where our treasure is, there our heart is also. And we can only pick one master, guys. If we're our own master, does it work? If your desire is your own master, it doesn't work. An idol's a good thing that becomes the main thing, and it ruins everything. That's what Jesus is talking about. He's warning us about worshiping anything other than him. So as we finish today, I'm going to read these words of Jesus. 10 chapters later, as the disciples are wrestling with some difficult things Jesus was saying, Jen, are you good coming up? And we're going to finish up singing a song. There won't be words, but whatever. It's called King of My Heart if you'd like to look it up on your phone to get the lyrics. But Jesus said this to his disciples, and I think it's a great way to finish. He said, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? What shall we give in return for our souls? These other things that would seek to master us will bring nothing but destruction to our lives and to the lives of those around us. I really want to encourage you this week as you walk through this week to take a moment and take account of what's going on in your life, how you spending your time, how you spending your resources. Jesus isn't doing this to try to add things on top, but saying if you want to have life, it's found here, and it's found here in abundance. And if you're here and you're not yet a follower of Jesus, I want to let you know Jesus as master is wondrous. There's grace, there's forgiveness, there's hope for the present, forgiveness for our past.